Welcome to the very first episode of Take the Cannoli, the ultimate Mafia podcast. You're about to embark on an epic journey. A journey of subterfuge, secrecy, conspiracy, murder and corruption. A journey that begins on the sun-drenched island of Sicily in the 15th century, then continues up the spine of Italy before spreading out and cementing itself across Europe and the United States. Spanning several centuries, you're going to meet a cast of characters that no work of fiction could produce. Some of those names you will already know: Riina, Gambino, Gotti, Buscetta, Bonanno, Luciano, but many you won't. Like any good Odyssey, it's vital to have a firm grasp on the origin story, and these first 3 episodes are going to give you a crash course in Cosa Nostra origin and the rules and rituals that have barely changed in over 200 years.
È molto strano il comportamento di un uomo d'onore, il quale lui è, parlare delle mie vicende personali di famiglia.
That was Tommaso Buscetta giving evidence to the 1986 Maxi trial in Palermo. Buscetta wasn't the first member of Cosa Nostra to give evidence and to cooperate with authorities, but he was the first one to be so detailed, and crucially, the first pentito whose tales of initiation ceremonies, the internal structure and day-to-day life of Cosa Nostra were given real attention from the Italian state. Buscetta spent 45 days laying bare the murky world of the Sicilian Mafia to Giovanni Falcone. Previously, stories from Pentito about how the machine of Cosa Nostra worked were dismissed as folktales, or entirely discounted as the lies of criminals. We'll get to Buscetta and the Maxi trials a little later, but it's important for context to realise that the 1986 Maxi trials were the very first time that an Italian court had listened to and given weight to the structure and ideals of Cosa Nostra. Almost 200 years after the first shoots of Cosa Nostra began sprouting across Sicily. 200 years of apathy, laziness and denial allowed a criminal enterprise born in the narrow streets of Palermo and the hills of Corleone, whose tentacles have stretched across the globe, leaving death and destruction in their wake. Their silent hand pulling the strings of power across Europe and America. From the Pope's banker, Roberto Calvi, found hanging from London's Blackfriars Bridge, to the corridors of the White House, La Piovra, the octopus, as Italians often refer to Cosa Nostra, has outlasted dictators, rulers, and the full weight of the resources that the US federal government has thrown at it. They have survived and prospered through 2 world wars and multiple state-sponsored crackdowns. Much like a virus, Cosa Nostra has shown countless times it has the ability to disappear, working in the shadows and lying seemingly dormant for years, only to reappear stronger and adapted to whatever opportunities are there to be exploited. Delving into the origins of Cosa Nostra leads you into a tangled web of mythology and fact, and in many ways that's by design. It served the perception of Cosa Nostra well to position themselves as an honoured society, elevated above mere criminals by a code of honour and ethics, but equally easily dismissed as just a folktale. It's allowed a romanticised version to embed itself in the minds of not only the members of Cosa Nostra, but into the psyche of the Italian people. It's an image that has been reinforced time and again over the years. This mainstream romanticised image of Sicilian honour got its first path into popular culture through the insanely popular Cavalleria Rusticana, the Titanic or Terminator 2 of its day. I'm slightly showing my age there. Younger listeners, think of Avengers Endgame. Even if you hadn't seen it, you couldn't escape people talking about it. Even today, you remember that music from Robert De Niro's graceful waltz around the ring in Raging Bull, or that ran through the entirety of Godfather Part 3. Pietro Mascagni's opera set amongst the peasants of Sicily is a tale of jealousy, honour and vengeance. Its opening night in Rome saw an incredible 30 curtain calls, demanded by the audience, which included the Queen of Italy, who was reported to have been unable to stop applauding all evening. Cavalleria Rusticana, or rustic chivalry in English, went on to become an international sensation, forever cementing the image of that defiantly proud and honourable Sicilian. It allowed a myth to form that Cosa Nostra's men of honour took advantage of to elevate a criminal enterprise into a world of ritual, secrecy and silence. So what is Cosa Nostra's origin story? One story that is often passed between men of honour is the story of the Garduña, a secret criminal society from Spain that dates back to 1417. Said to have operated for over 400 years, the Garduña are claimed to have been the shadowy operatives hired to carry out some of the worst atrocities of the Spanish Inquisition, and the root of the crime epidemic that plagued Andalusia. When Spain controlled Naples in the 18th century, many of Spain's criminal element were deported and dumped in Naples, which is thought to have led to the formation of the Camorra. While there's a decent amount of historical evidence to support Spain favouring Naples as the dumping ground for their criminal element, as origin stories go, it's fairly vanilla, and it doesn't really square with the honourable beginnings that Cosa Nostra claims. That's where the story of three brothers comes in: the Spanish knights, Osso, Mastroso, and Carcagnoso. There are several slightly different versions of this story. One is that in protecting their sister's honour, they killed a man under the protection of the King of Spain and were forced to flee Spain. Or, alternatively, that they were wrongfully accused of killing their sister's attacker and sent to a prison. Either way, the story goes on to explain how they were shipwrecked and then imprisoned on the island of Favignana near Sicily. Osso, who was protected by St. George, remained in Sicily and founded Cosa Nostra. Mastroso, protected by the Archangel St. Michael, left for Calabria, where he founded Ndrangheta, while Carcagnoso, under the protection of the Virgin Mary, made his way to Naples and founded the Camorra. This tale is heavily cemented in Ndrangheta folklore and is the subject of an immensely popular Calabrian folk song. The key to this origin is it delivers a seal of religious approval, a divine authority that for Catholic Southern Italians was absolute. Interestingly, the Triads have an almost identical origin mythology. In their story, it is 5 surviving Shaolin monks wrongly accused and double-crossed by the ruling emperor. Seeking to avenge the murder of their 123 fellow monks, they formed separate lodges of the Triads. The historical link that Cosa Nostra's men of honour still refer to this day is that of the Beati Paoli. The Beati Paoli were a secret society formed to exact vengeance for the oppressed peasants of Palermo during the brutal Norman rule. It's often assumed that Beati Paoli was formed from the 12th century Vendicosi, the vengeful, who also provided vengeance and retribution for the oppressed. The Marchese di Villabianca, who was the senator for Palermo between 1775 and 1776, wrote about the tales that he had heard of the Beati Paoli as a boy. In his Palermo pamphlets, he recounts the Beati Paoli as cult of the wicked, bearer of summary justice and cruel murders and tortures against powerful social classes in order to protect the oppressed. Luigi Napoli also wrote about the secret sect in his novel I, Beati Paoli. Writing under the pseudonym William Galt, he told the tale of a noble and heroic group of knights fighting for and protecting the poor of Sicily. Through this fictional account, Beati Paoli became the Sicilian Robin Hoods, fighting cruelty and robbing the rich to feed the poor. Swashbuckling fiction aside, there's plenty of historical evidence to confirm the existence of Beati Paoli, and you can still visit their clandestine meeting point in the tunnels beneath the Capo area of Palermo through a small door in Vicolo degli Orfani. Latching on to a popular myth and using the goodwill and sentiment that Sicilians had bestowed upon the Beati Paoli was fantastically brilliant. Just as Cosa Nostra was beginning to enter the public consciousness as a very real presence in Sicily in the late 19th century, Sicilians already had a concept of a noble Beati Paoli helping out fellow Sicilians. The people of Sicily were coming to terms with new rulers, having just voted to join the Italian kingdom after Garibaldi's defeat of the Bourbon rulers. Garibaldi's conquering of Palermo was just one more invader staking claim to the capital. While this invader may have been welcomed by some, Garibaldi was just the latest in a long, long line of conquerors in Palermo's long history. Often cited as the most conquered city in the world, since it was founded by the Phoenicians in 734 BC, Palermo has seen Athenian, Roman, Arabic, Norman, and French rulers. That these new rulers were so close meant very little to Sicilians, or to their sense of Sicilian identity. Throughout its history, Sicily had either been a land of bounty and wealth, or left isolated as a desolate outlier, stripped of wealth and power and just left to fend for themselves. The Bourbon rulers, who were dethroned by Garibaldi, had done much to allow a criminal network to embed themselves into the daily life of Sicily. Secure in palaces in Naples and Palermo, the Bourbons had neither the will nor the ability to rid the Sicilian countryside of bandits. Bandits were not uncommon in the 1800s, nor were they a particularly Sicilian problem. Bandits were a mainstay of southern Europe at the time, particularly on the islands of the Mediterranean. At the time, Spain had a far worse problem with bandits, many of whom enjoyed huge fame and adulation from local people. Andalusia, and to a lesser extent the island of Majorca, seemed to produce celebrity bandoleros by the bucketload during the 18th and 19th century. What made Sicily's bandit problem unique was the response from the ruling Bourbons. In response to growing anger from landowners and demands to provide protection, the Bourbon King Ferdinand signed a decree setting up compagnie di armi, small groups of armed men on horseback who were tasked with ridding the countryside of bandits and protecting landowners' financial interests. That many of the men hired, and paid handsomely for their services, were the self-same bandits reigning terror across Sicily, allowed the growth of a network of criminals all across the island, communicating and working together towards one common goal, exploiting both the state and fellow citizens, while at the same time positioning themselves as an ally to both. That's a goal that hasn't deviated or changed at all in over 200 years of Cosa Nostra history. The apathy and incompetence of the Bourbons meant that for decades the reality of Sicilian life was the operation of a shadowy state within a state. Even a report from the public prosecutor of Trapani, Pietro Cala Ulloa, to the Justice Ministry of Naples in 1838 fell on deaf ears. Ulloa warned of sects, of brotherhoods in villages across Sicily. Ulloa never used the term mafia in his warning, but described these groups as a government within a government. These groups, Ulloa warned, oversaw all disputes and mediated the recovery of stolen property, all for a price. They utilised a common fund to deliver bribes and protection for connected members. With no help from the state and an indifferent attitude from the gentry and ruling classes safely tucked up in Palermo, unelected and unofficial figures of authority became part of the fabric of Sicilian life and an accepted reality for Sicilian people. However, it wasn't long before these honourable societies began to reveal their true nature. With the Bourbons unable to stamp any authority on the island, rich landowners increasingly turned to the unofficial channels that were open to them. One common theme amongst the gentry and wealthy of Sicily and wider southern Italy was their indifference to the management of their estates. As long as the income from their vast wheat fields was not interrupted, landowners wanted as little to do with their latifondi as possible. From the comfort of Palermo, landowners turned to the gabellotti, entrepreneurs who rented the farms and lands from aristocrats, thereby guaranteeing their income while releasing them from the responsibility and risk of running an estate. Unfortunately for the landowners, two things happened. First, the Gabalotti used the Bourbon ruling on allowing armed men on horseback to hire protection, known as campieri, the often brutal and unscrupulous enforcers of the Gabalotti. The Gabalotti and campieri effectively became the state and presided over a harsh regime that exploited day labourers as much as possible. Second, as would become a trademark for Cosa Nostra, they began to alter the deals they had struck with landowners, paying ever-decreasing rents and then squeezing them into oppressive loans in order to maintain their affluent lifestyles. This was where Cosa Nostra thrived, engineering situations and environments where they could exploit and drain everyone and everything in their path. By the time Sicily became part of Italy in 1860, the Gabalotti were in complete control of much of rural Sicily. When the Italian state welcomed Sicily into their fold, northern Italian nobility could barely contain their excitement. They envisaged prosperous links with Sicilian nobility and a profitable relationship with the old breadbasket of the Roman Empire. Palermo can be deceptive. A seductive, romantic city that is framed by lemon and olive groves. Beautiful Baroque palaces punctuated the city's orderly layout. In the early evening, the streets were populated by chic palmeratani, taking their passeggiata to the sounds of arias performed by the city orchestra. To visiting Italians, Palermo seemed like a fairy tale, the centuries of invading cultures having left their mark across the city, leaving Palermo as a living antiquity. Around every corner lay yet another beautifully preserved reminder of past conquerors. With its beautiful coastline, Palermo seemed at first glance to be a paradise, the perfect retreat for the Italian elite, and coupled with the prospects of untapped business opportunities, Sicily was a seductive prospect. However, just below the surface lay anarchy, and a level of corruption so entrenched that it was impossible to untangle unofficial power from official power. The Italian state's response was one that would come to define Sicily's relationship with the mainland for generations to come. By refusing to grant Sicily a seat at the table of power, Sicilians, distrustful by nature after enduring centuries of conquest, defaulted to what they knew best, the world of Gabalotti, Campieri, and Cosa Nostra. It would be 16 years of revolt and uprising before Sicilian politicians were finally given a seat at the table of power and accepted by Rome. The period between 1860 and 1876 was wild, even by Sicilian standards, and many historians point to this period as the birth of Cosa Nostra. But the reality is, Cosa Nostra already existed. The reason they so easily flourished in this period of social and political upheaval were the foundations that had been put in place decades before. When the Italian state ended feudalism in Sicily, the state redistributed land that had previously belonged to the church and the ruling class. Almost overnight, Sicily had increased the number of private landowners tenfold. And those new landowners, who were not men of honour, would need protection from other men of honour. And so the cycle continued. For Cosa Nostra, the change of flag flying over Sicily had zero impact on their growth and their livelihood. Coming next on Take the Cannoli, we'll discuss the origins of the term Mafia. We'll learn how the murder of one of Sicily's most respected nobles, a former mayor of Palermo and governor of the Bank of Sicily, showed the wider Italian public their first glimpse of the octopus's power, striking in broad daylight before vanishing. And we will hear how Cosa Nostra's tentacles had already reached deep into the heart of Italy. Until next time, ciao tutti.